Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Special Growth, Infrastructure and Resources Scrutiny Committee meeting. As usual, may I remind you all to mute unless you are addressing an item and raise your virtual hands should you wish to speak at any point in the meeting. We have one item on the agenda tonight, but a lot to discuss to get through. There might be times when I defer to officers and ask them to get back to you on any specific point. May I also remind members that any discussion regarding financial matters must not be held in a public session. At such times as when these matters need to be discussed by committee, the public session via Zoom will be closed so that the committee members can then meet in private via Teams. If we get close to the finish time of 9:30, I will ask to take a vote on extended meeting till 10 p.m, which is the absolute cut-off point. So the first item on the agenda, apologies, Jane. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Miranda Jones, Councillor Ian Rozelle, the portfolio holder, and Councillor Lucy Stevenson, portfolio holder.
Okay, fine. Declarations of interest. Do we have any interest to be declared this evening? Jane? No, nobody's raised anything. So
No, nobody.
No. So petitions, deputations and questions. Do we have any petitions, deputations and questions? Jane?
No.
I think Jane's frozen.
No.
Jane Jane's frozen.
Yeah, I believe that
No.
we have none, so we'll move on to item 4. Questions with notice from members. Do we have any questions with notice from members, Jane?
No, Chair.
Okay, smashing. So now we go on to item 5, which is the leisure contract, the business case. To receive report number 110/2021, a presentation from Councillor A. Walters, portfolio holder for health, wellbeing and adult care, and Penny Sharp, strategic director of places. Councillor Walters, would you like to go ahead, please?
Councillor Walters appears to have dropped out.
Oh dear, oh dear.
So it may be over to me.
I think you're in the hot seat then, Penny. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Oh, he's back into the attendees, Jane, if you're able to promote. You, Councillor Walters,
I'm saying nothing.
You're on. You're on. Please save Penny.
Right.
Do you want me to?
Well, it depends what you. Well, do you mean I'm on screen, or do you want me to say something?
Well, we've got to the reports. Would you like me to present an overview, or would you?
Well, before you do that, Penny, I'm always saying this, but it's not for me to tell scrutiny what to do. But what I can do is guide you on what would be helpful to me. So what would be helpful to me is some kind of steer as to whether any of the options are completely unacceptable, either politically, financially, practically, or whatever else, or if any are standouts as things we should really go into finer detail to try to achieve. I don't shy away from the fact that ultimately I will be the person who makes a recommendation to Cabinet. But as I've said before, my preferred way of working is to work with scrutiny rather than presenting a finished report to you and then having you tear it to pieces. So in the next hour or two, if we could work in that direction so we can hopefully come to a consensus as to what's possible, not possible, that would be really helpful. But I think Penny is the best person for the actual report introduction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like to go ahead, Penny, please?
Thank you, Councillor Fox. So good evening. You've had the report and the copy of the public presentation, which I will run through shortly, just by way of an overview and just to remind scrutiny of the process that we've been through to date. As you're aware, we are due to, our contract with Stevenage Leisure Limited has been extended, but we find ourselves obviously in a position of needing to make some choices about how the council wants to proceed in terms of leisure moving forwards. And there's a range of options for council to consider in terms of how it may wish to reconfigure its leisure offer and provide services into the future. And I'll run through each of those options in a bit more detail shortly. Again, as scrutiny is aware, we've been through and we have a significant project plan to get us to the point of making a decision about whether or not it is necessary to re-procure services, and if so, moving then into the process of specifying what those services may be, and then ultimately looking to make sure we have a new provision in place by the end of this existing contract extension, so 2023. I would describe the phase that we're in at the moment as a commissioning phase. So it's very much about establishing and identifying what the need is within the county. And we commissioned an initial leisure needs assessment that has done a combination or undertook a combination of research, so some desktop research, some looking at sort of Sport England benchmarking, and also was informed by Future Rutland consultation with residents. That's culminated in a report produced by our consultants, RPT Consulting, which has informed the options that I'll run through shortly, and has also informed the summary that forms the basis of the report in front of the committee tonight. So we are very much at the first stage of looking at all of the options that may be available to the council in terms of continuing to provide leisure services across the county. And tonight really is in part to get your views around, as Councillor Walters said, which of those options or all of them you may wish us to proceed with developing further. Because of where we are at this point in the process, I know the committee's been very keen to get into the financial detail, and obviously there's the opportunity potentially to move into exempt session to do that. I would want to reiterate that again we are still at a very high level stage. We have done some financial modelling, but it does need to be heavily caveated that it is high level at this point by necessity. So the project team and board have looked at the range of options that we think are available. Scrutiny may think there are others that perhaps we should be considering, and done an initial assessment of those options based on consideration of financial objectives, how well they meet the need that has been identified through the leisure needs analysis, feasibility, so how readily we think they would be able to be delivered, and also additional benefits, so those that would we think might leverage additional opportunities or further scope for enhancing provision within the county. So that's sort of high level introduction. Shall I pause there, or do you want me to go into the presentation just to go through the options in a bit more detail, Chair?
Yeah, could you go through the options in a bit more detail?
Yeah, sure. Okay, if I just see if I can share.
Oh, hang on a second. Councillor Brown has his hand up. You're on mute, Gordon.
Yeah, just before we move to the options analysis, I read the paper, the public paper that came out, And on big page 13, it talks about the need. But there's no evidence presented with that need. It just says the facility assessment finds existing supply facilities are sufficient as long as, and it's got three aspects of it. But it's not clear whether these are, first of all, why that there is a need for that, number one. There's a want for it, and we've seen that through Future Rutland. And my understanding was that Future Rutland was not part of the needs analysis when the project started. And then secondly, we've got three elements here. Are those mutually exclusive, or must they all come together to meet the needs? And again, that's not clear in the needs analysis report.
Would you like to reply, Penny, or?
Yes, sorry, I'm toggling between screens. I'm on a laptop and toggling between different windows, apologies. So the report that Scrutiny has is a summary overview of both the needs analysis and the options that have subsequently been developed. There is a very detailed consultant's report that sits behind this and does set out in considerable detail the evidence that identifies the need.
Councillor Daggy, you're right. Oh, sorry, Gordon, did you have a supplementary?
Yeah, I just wondered, is there any reason why Scrutiny hasn't seen that needs analysis?
So there was an informal session where we talked through the needs analysis with the consultant with Scrutiny some months ago. There's no reason why Scrutiny can't see the report. It's available. It really tonight was to focus in on the options and to have a discussion about those high-level options.
Okay, I think I certainly would appreciate viewing that final report of the consultant with the detail of that needs assessment, because that's fairly fundamental to everything we're going on to talk about. You know, if that's been identified as the need, I'm sure there's background to it, and then we understand why that is. We can then have a much better idea when we look at the options and why we should be looking at these options.
So the need that the need that the consultant's report has identified is essentially public access swimming in Oakham, assuming that all current provision stays available. So the access to drive facilities and access to the facilities outside of the county.
Right, but sorry to again to pick up the point, but there are 3 points in item 11 on page 13. There are 3 separate points. I'm really interested to know whether those are 3 mutually exclusive. So if any one of those was met, the need would be met, or we have to have all 3 to meet the need.
So sorry,
it doesn't say that, unfortunately.
Yeah. So to be really clear, community access to a pool, public access to a pool in Oakham is a definite identified need, and it is important to still have the access that is currently available through the 2 independent schools. Whether that's enhanced would be a nice to have, not a need to have. And again, that assessment is also based on the facilities at Stamford, Corby and Melton remaining available and unchanged in terms of reduced provision.
So what we're saying is there's an absolute need to have a separate swimming pool in Oakham for whatever reason in the future. We've got to have.
No, we're not saying that. What we're saying is the absolute need is access, public access to swimming. That doesn't mean necessarily a pool. It means enabling the public to be able to access other facilities.
Okay, so okay, that wasn't clear in what was said in that paragraph, unfortunately. I now understand what you're saying, that we need some access in Oakham, although there's Oakham School, which has access, and we have some access to Stamford, Corby and Melton, and that would be the minimum requirement.
Yeah, and the question about why Oakham is just the geographic spread. of the facilities.
Right. So we're not
But
interested in,
I can,
so we're
when
not
we go
interested
into
in
the
places
options
like,
in-
no, it's places
Sorry.
like Ketton, etc., where, you know, we're not going to have a swimming pool access at all. Okay. I'll leave it. Thank you.
Councillor Beggy, would you like to go next? You had your hand up next.
Yeah, please. Gordon, you've obviously cleverer than I, because I'm still a bit confused. I'm still not sure if you're saying that we need those, if we had a pool in Oakham, do we still need those other two facilities to meet the requirement, which seems to defeat the object? But that wasn't my question. My question is going back to the consultant's report, and I too would like to see it and understand what the granularity of that needs analysis is. I understand there is a need for access to swimming, but we're also talking about dry side leisure facilities as well, and what the need is for those, what individual elements within that dry facility is a need for the local population. Do they need badminton courts? Do they need a gym? What is that need made up of? Because there are potential other solutions and other sites around the county to meet that. And I don't get that from here. What I'm seeing here is we need a leisure centre and we need a pool. So i.e. effectively what we've got now in some place, as opposed to knowing what it is that we need.
Would you like to come back on that, Penny or Alan?
Yes, if I may. It's when I go through the options, hopefully you'll see that it absolutely isn't about replicating current provision or a new facility. There is a range of options that range from having no facilities provided by the council through to a brand new facility that has wet and dry, and we can talk through those options in a bit more detail.
Well, when we do that, can we then go through the specific needs that they meet, as opposed to just saying we need a dry facility?
Yes, so the assessment is based on the provision that is existing CAPMUS in terms of facilities, but that doesn't require CAPMUS to meet those needs. So the gym and the multi-use courts.
So the consultant has said the need is what we have already, as terms of
what we currently have satisfies our resident need.
Okay, I'm not quite sure that is a needs analysis. That's telling you that what we've got will meet that need. We don't know if that's over providing or under providing. There's no actual specific request of these are the individual needs of our residents, but we can go through that when you go through the options.
Councillor Waller, would you like to hear the options first, or shall we have
No,
some
I'd like
questions
to say, no, sorry, if I may, Chairman, I'd like to say something about need.
Yeah.
Thank you. I need a swimming pool within a 3-metre walk of my house, because I don't want to walk any further. And I need lots of space in the changing rooms, because as a sight disabled person, I need lots of space around me. Oh, and by the way, although I need all that, I'm only going to use it once a year. Is that okay, folks? And that was what was going through my head when I read all this about need. Now, I understand some of the elements in calculating need, but not all of them. And I know some of it the consultants have used is guidance from Sport England, but they have a vested interest in sports facilities. And I would have thought, as a council, and a geographically small council at that we should be identifying what we think is need as opposed to a what have. And by the way, I wouldn't expect the council to build a swimming pool within 5 yards of my house, because although I might say that's my need, no rational person would identify that as a need. And so why are we providing any sports facilities at all? What is the legal requirement for us to do so? We're not told that up front. What would be, for all of our minds, desirable, and public health, I'm sure, would be high for all of us, as you know, we want to improve public health and what's the best way of doing it. But to me, what I've read so far, and I've read everything that's been sent to me, including the extremely outdated analysis of the sports provision from 2015-16, and it's changed enormously in Rutland since then. But what I've read, it reads like somebody who wants us to do lots and lots of sporty facilities, and therefore they're couching it in terms of need as opposed to desirable. And I was very unhappy with the word need as well. And I know Gordon has probably articulated it far better than I have, but I'm with Gordon on this one. Thank you.
Does anybody want to come back, or shall I go on to Councillor Walton?
I've had my hand up a while.
You've been very patient. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so it's a shame that we can't all remember the presentation we had before, because the need was explained at the time. I'm not sure if everyone was there. So my recollection is need for a pool based on population, based on facilities available, being within 20 minutes journey time. I don't see anyone shaking their heads or nodding, so perhaps it's only me that remembers that. But even then, I'm not sure that's completely a need. That is the reason why Oakham apparently needs it, because in Uppingham you can get to Corby, in Whissendine you can get to Melton, and so on. From my point of view, do we have an absolute need for a community swimming pool? I think the answer is no. I think it is more, it's not just that people want one, it is that it is the centre of Rutland and the furthest to get to any other facility. Is there an absolute need? I don't accept that. If that helps you. It probably doesn't. And Gail, by the way, you ask a very good question. Should we be providing any of these facilities at all and interfering in the market? The problem is that all districts seem to be doing so. And we have a 2,500 signature petition to have a swimming pool. But I'll throw it back to you guys and girls.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure who was next, whether it was Paul or Mark. So
It was Paul.
do you want to go? Paul, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Chair. Just a very quick question, really. Did I hear correctly that we said that the dry facilities at Catmos currently satisfy the needs of Rutland residents? Did I understand that correctly, Penny?
Am I okay to respond? Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
So in terms of meeting the Sport England requirements benchmark, which is Councillor Walters' reference, then the dry side provision at Catmos has been taken into account to assess dry side provision across the county, and based on what we currently have at Catmos and in other locations, there is sufficient dry side facilities to satisfy and meet our resident needs.
Thank you. That clarifies what I wanted to ask. Thank you very much.
Do you have a supplementary now? Mark, have you got a question?
Yeah, yes, it's following on from that. I think it would have helped if we had a lot more information about actually where people can presently swim, because I think we have mentioned Corby, Stamford, Melton, but there are also in Uppingham and Oakham, there are public schools which have wonderful facilities. And also there are swimming pools in other schools in the county, and it would have helped, I think, if we had a list. I don't know if it was at that presentation, which occurred quite a long time ago, but anyway, it would have helped, I think, if we were able to, in order to be able to make a judgment based on need and access to wet facilities. It would have helped if we actually had a list of all the wet facilities which are available in the county, in order to help us to make that decision. But I didn't see anything in the papers that actually has that. So that it would help. I don't know if Alan knows as the portfolio holder for sport exactly.
Well, I wouldn't like to try to give a definitive list, but I think we can safely say you have in fact just listed them and that there isn't anything in Oakham.
Well, it's Oakham School.
And that's the whole point. So the answer partly to Paul's question is it meets the need for swimming in Oakham. It doesn't meet the need for swimming in Rutland.
Sorry, Alan, my question was about the dry facilities, not the wet.
Yeah. But dry as well, in fact, to a large extent.
Just Oakham.
Yeah, it
Okay,
contributes to the overall Rutland need, but it is very much Oakham centric, isn't it?
Yeah.
Having said that, I've had complaints from people outside of Rutland complaining about the swimming pool being closed because they travel in from outside of Rutland to it.
I'm not going to say. I'm not going to say anything else.
Okay. Sorry, Mark. Penny, did you want to come back in with a comment before we'll move on to Councillor Waller?
Yes. So just to say that option B, that's in the report pack and that we'll go through, is specifically about extending provision at the schools, and specifically Oakham and Uppingham independent schools.
Councillor Waller, would you like to ask your question before we go on to the presentation?
I would like to, if I may, I'd like to make an observation and then tie it in with a question. In that, I do remember the presentation, and when I mentioned earlier the Sport England criteria that Alan I itemised, that was actually what I was referring to. But that in itself is totally arbitrary. You know, why 20 minutes from facility when, you know, if you live where I do and you're reliant on public transport, it takes you 2.5 hours to get to Oakham because of bus changing and so on. And then you can only do it, you know, in the daytime. So it's an arbitrary measure of need. And I don't think that necessarily serves our interests. And moving on from that, what about all the other pools that people could have access to, or we could broker access for different groups? And there is provision in Oakham, that's Oakham School. If you're disabled, presumably there's provision at Oakham C of E, but you know, what was the parks element of that? If you're a child wanting to learn to swim, or indeed an adult for that matter, why isn't there something brokered at Edith Weston School? They refurbed their pool not that long ago. And when we were speaking the other day, Nick reminded us that there was pool facilities at the campsite in Greetham. Have I got that right, Nick? Yeah, thank you. And I'm sure there are others if we put our heads together, but they're not mentioned in this report. And that's what I meant about the reports that we've had are not comprehensive. And so without comprehensive information, and I appreciate it was desktop exercise, but to me, I question the findings, because it's like, you know, the old thing about the computer, rubbish in, rubbish out. And how can you trust a judgment when the basic data is incomplete? And that's the question. My question is, why haven't all the facilities been referenced? Because places like Edith Weston are certainly less than 20-minute drive from Oakham. Thank you.
Councillor Waters, would you like to come back in on that one, please?
I'll come back on part of that. Why have we included the reference to need regarding 20 minutes? And Penny or Robert may correct me here. If we were to decide on one of the options and then to seek funding, it would be important that we had an evidence base that was based on the Sports England criteria. That doesn't mean to say you have to accept it, but if you said you want a new swimming pool in Uppingham, for example, you could probably struggle to get that justified and get a grant from Sports England because it's so close to Corby. So that's the reason that they have followed that criteria, but you don't have to accept it. That is just why it's there. And your point is well made, and you've pointed out a couple of swimming pools that I didn't know about. But I think it's up to you how far you want to go down this line. I'm more concerned with, do we want to continue to invest in Catmos College property? It'll never be ours. Is it an appropriate thing to do? And to devote so much money largely meeting the needs of Oakham? But I appreciate you've got detailed questions and we'll try to help.
So do you think we ought to move on to the presentation now? Because that might answer some of the additional questions we have, because we might be asking questions that are actually in the presentation as we did the last GIR meeting. So Penny, could you go on with the presentation now, please? You're on mute.
Can you see the presentation? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, let me just get it on slideshow. Yeah, can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so just to remind you, this was in the report as well, or the covering report. So this is the range of options that we've explored and identified to date, and this is where we're really keen to sort of hear in terms of scrutiny views. So if I just give you an overview of what each of these means. So option A is to, sorry, just before I go through these, the point to make is that none of these are mutually exclusive. They could be, you could look at a combination of these. But we've separated them out because they are also standalone options. So option A is essentially about the council exiting the leisure market. Penny,
can I just very quickly interrupt you, please? What I'm seeing on screen now is actually, I can't see the whole presentation. It's
okay.
cut off because of the size, I think. Is that, Gail, are you able to read that? Is that the problem here, or have you got a copy that you can read?
I wouldn't be able to see it on screen even if it fitted. I can see that it doesn't fit, but I've got a hard copy. Thank you, Paul.
Okay, so I think if you can just go back to that view, a view that actually we can read it, and then we don't need to go so big.
Are you okay with?
Personally, I am. I can't speak for others.
Penny, if you want to stop sharing your screen, I can share it on mine.
Okay, thanks, Jane. I'm just going to work out how to stop sharing it now. I can't see that window anymore.
There we go.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Jane.
Can you see my screen?
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so option A is about fostering provision through existing community facilities and open spaces. And you may recall from the presentation that we did provide around the leisure needs assessment, and certainly some of the findings through the Future Rutland conversation, was just the breadth of offer that we already have within the county through our network of sports clubs and parks and open spaces, and there's sort of very strong evidence coming through there, and the assessment that actually, particularly for our residents and communities, that there is a real value in what we call sort of active environments, so the running, cycling, walking in and around the county and the countryside that we have on offer. So option A on its own would essentially see the council exit from the provision of leisure facilities, and residents able to access leisure and wellbeing opportunities through community provision, and that could be an option that is exit as is, or there could be an option for the council to invest in facilitating that network further. I think it's important to make the point that actually the council already invests in this in different ways. So we invest in our public rights of way maintenance. We invest through grants and loans in some of our sports clubs in the county, and through the use of 106 grants and other funding. We also invest in provision of community facilities in villages and across the county. So that option would see the council exit from Catmus and would not require the need for a procurement of a new leisure operator. Option B is the one that Councillor Oxley was referencing. Again, this could be a standalone, so this could see the council exit from Catmus and negotiate with both Uppingham and Oakham School enhanced public access to their facilities. Initial discussions with the school have indicated that there would be a willingness to provide some additional public access. The constraint on this is obviously that the pools are used by the schools for their students, so there is limitations to the extent to which it would be available to the public, and obviously that would be at the sort of school's behest as to what, you know, the opening on the public hours that would be available. Option C would be to cease provision at Catmus, and so again, sort of potentially akin to A, which is basically exiting the provision of leisure facilities, and could be supplemented with, I say, either investment in A or negotiating additional access to the independent schools. The reason, and coming back to Councillor Waller's earlier question, that the detailed needs assessment does identify other swimming pool facilities across the county. The reason that it's honed in particularly on Uppingham and Oakham School is that they already have some element of public access, whereas others don't currently. Option D is would see the council remaining with a dry side operation at Catmus and exiting from the swimming pool, which is, as we know, would require considerable investment to bring it back to an operational standard. So this option D would be keep the pool closed, but continue to operate dry side facilities at Catmus Sports Centre. Option E is to improve the wet and dry facilities, so to upgrade and refurb to bring them up to standard and address some of the issues that we've identified in terms of the condition surveys of the building, and improving the sort of acceptability to the public. Primarily, it's meeting the sort of maintenance requirements that the condition survey has identified. So that would see the council retaining both wet and dry provision at Catmus Sports Centre, and would require the need for re-procurement of an operator, unless the council chose to decide to bring the operation in-house. Option F is new wet and dry provision at a new site. So this is basically the council choosing to invest in developing a brand new facility at a site to be identified. Option G is developing a new pool. So F, G and H all would see us exiting from the Catmus campus and needing to identify a new site. G is a new site just for a swimming pool, and F would be a new site just for dry side facilities. So that's the range of options that we've identified as potentials for the way the council might wish to proceed with its leisure offer in the future. We can move on, Jim. Thank you. So the slides get slightly more challenging in terms of viewing them on screen, but hopefully you have had them in your packs as well. So as I said earlier, the project team and board have done a high level evaluation and scoring of each of those options to rank those, or each of them in turn. And the criteria that we applied in terms of that evaluation were the extent to which they identified the need that has been identified, so particularly this public access swimming. Opportunities is, as I said, the extent to which they would provide further scope and leverage additional benefit for the county and its residents. The financial evaluation is based on our assessment of likely cost, again, high level, as we'll potentially come on to, and feasibility, as I say, is around how deliverable we believe that option to be. That evaluation, based on that assessment, has ranked or identified option A, B, E, and F as potentially the most preferred options, probably the wrong word, but the options that best meet those criteria. So option A being the one around in fostering the existing network of sports and community provision that we have across the county. Option B being the scope to negotiate additional public access swimming in the 2 schools. E, investing in improving and operating wet and dry facilities at Catmos, and F being the option around investment in a brand new facility at a new location. Thank you. So, I mean, in terms of the explanation in terms of the sort of assessment around the benefits of those options and the risks of the options is sort of, there's commentary there we can go into in more detail if you wish. If we can just move on to the next slide, Jane, where we just start to pull out some of the sort of indicative risks of just the 4 top ranking options. So option A, this exiting the leisure market entirely. The risks associated with that to the council are not meeting this identified need for public access swimming in Oakham. We would be leaving the provision of leisure services to the market, so that we would have no influence or control over price, cost and hours of access. There will be a cost associated with exiting from the current leases and the requirement to make good on the existing facilities. And there are grant conditions associated with the Catmos facilities and the Sport England grant that were negotiated that we would obviously have to work with Sport England on. Option B, in terms of some of the risks associated with this, and again, just to remind you, this is the option around negotiating additional access to the school's swimming pools. Risk with this one is that the schools aren't able to meet the full requirement or would require significant financial contribution in terms of a shared use contract. similar to option A, we wouldn't have necessarily control over the provision or the costs, and we would be reliant on the school in terms of wishing to continue with the arrangement, albeit we can clearly negotiate a contract over for delivery of those services. They are currently membership organisations, so that again would be within the school's domain in terms of setting those membership pricing structures. There is a risk currently with being able to provide disabled access facilities. Clearly, there is an option for the council to work with the schools to enhance access for those with disabilities through negotiation. And the same risks associated with option A of exiting from CATMUS in terms of needing to pay for making good, and the grant condition linked to the Sport England grant. Thank you, Jane. We can go to the next one. So option E, this is refurbing and making sure that we meet the sort of health and safety requirements of CATMUS, but the council continues with wet and dry provision at the CATMUS Sports Centre. There is a risk with this one in that one of the leases, and there's several leases for the CATMUS facility. One of those expires in 2032, which, if we were looking to procure a 10-year contract for operating the facility, would obviously mean that there is a risk of that lease expiring before the operator contract ended. Obviously, you know, there is scope to align those contract periods. The issue being the 10-year is currently is market standard, but there's no reason why that couldn't be varied to mitigate that risk. There is also an associated risk with that the school may not necessarily be willing to extend that lease to align with the other leases. We have, as it stands at the moment, we don't believe that to be the case, but it remains a risk that we need to identify. We would need to invest financially to bring the provision up to the required operational standards. This would require us to go out to the market to identify an operator unless the council wanted to bring the operation in-house. And with that comes the risk of failing to secure an operator. And we also have a risk of the current operator choosing to exit from the market. Option F is the development of new wet and dry facilities at a new site. And as you might imagine, this is the one that has the most risk associated with it. So clearly there's a risk of identifying funding and to invest in the facility, in the new facility, and also a need to acquire an appropriate site. Significant financial risk around being able to sort of identify and fund the initial capital investment. It would be a design and build of a new facility. So with that comes risks around the whole construction programme. Similarly to option E, we would need to procure an operator on the current delivery model or indeed in-house the operations. So again, those bring risks. And there could be an impact on the business model depending on the level of take-up. So I think as Scrutiny are probably aware, the model of take-up that SLL originally anticipated in terms of users of CATMUS, they have found very difficult to meet the original sort of model user numbers. With this option, it's a longer term option. So in the short term, there would be the risk associated with not having public access swimming, and again, leaving that to the market in terms of the costs of the provision and hours of access. And with this option, we still have the same risks and cost implications of exiting from Catmas. Thank you, Jane. Can you go on to the next one? So that is a summary and an overview of the options and the sort of initial assessment in terms of those that seem most feasible for the council to consider. But the purpose of this session, as Councillor Walters has said, is very much to get views from scrutiny in terms of those options. Obviously, if you want to discuss the finances in more, or the financial implications, not the finances, in more detail, then we can do that should you choose to go into exempt session.
I think personally, I don't know about the rest of the panel, that really we need to go into exempt, because I think a lot of the questions that, you know, following on from this will be in exempt. So do I have an agreement that we go into exempt now?
Before we go into exempt, can I very quickly ask a very simple question, which is not going to require us to go into exempt? I'm quite happy to go in after that. If I may, Councillor June Fox very kindly arranged visits for us to the various sites, and when we were at the dry facility at Catmos, there was some serious concerns about the sponginess of the floor and the fact the floor in the dry facilities may be looking as if they were collapsing. Has that, do we know what the current situation is, and we do know whether that in fact is going to require significant maintenance? That's my question really, before we go into.
You want me to, Penny?
Would you like to answer, Penny, or
Yes, yeah. Well, in fact, I was going to suggest if Robert is happy to come on that one. There have been some temporary issues with the floor which are being addressed, but Robert can provide some more information on that.
Yes, so in common with, thank you, Chair. In common with a lot of sports facilities that have been out of use during the COVID period, there have been issues with the floor. We've had a series of specialists coming out to have a look at it. They've identified a potential solution that's going to be put in place over the half-term break. So in about a couple of weeks' time, we're hoping that'll be rectified. SLL have organised that, so we're hoping that that issue will be sorted out. It appears to be improving significantly since the visit at which scrutiny took place. In fact, it's being used almost as usual now by the college, but public use hasn't been reinstated until after we've done the repairs. But it appears that we have a solution for that piece of work.
So can I take from that 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 is not a material concern in our deliberations, the state of the floor currently? Yep, thank you.
can I ask quickly who's picked up the bill on that? Is it under insurance, or are we actually having us, RCC, having to fund that repair? Robert.
Thank you. It comes within SLL's liability to meet the costs. So part of their contract is they have to meet up to £3,000 worth of repairs. The quote for this is below that. So they're picking up the tab at the moment. Fingers crossed it'll work. And it seems like a relatively straightforward fix, but we'll know more after half term.
Thank you. Councillor Oxley.
Yes, just very quickly again before we go into exempt, because the council does have other facilities at the Oakham Enterprise Park. We saw a wonderful dry gym, which I think we are renting to various organisations and clubs and supporting various organisations and clubs. So there are other parts. There is an offer which we are giving to sports clubs in other parts of the county, not just at this particular place at Catmos.
Councillor Ainsley, is that a historical hand before we go into exempt? You're on mute. You're still on mute.
Sorry, it seems to me that we really do need to, I want to make the point before we go into exempt that seems to me what's missing is that the catalogue, and that is of the communities, open spaces and community provision would be exceptionally useful, a full catalogue, and also, of course, we've already discussed the catalogue of the wet facilities that are available within the county and the immediate environs would actually exist. And that is, I think, certainly 2 recommendations that we should be making back before we go into the other major recommendations. Okay, thank you.
So do we have agreement all to go into exempt now? So close this meeting and go into Teams. Yeah, I see everybody nodding. So we'll end this session, please. Jane.